She had been standing there for 11 seconds. That is not a long time. 11 seconds is how long it takes to pour a glass of water or fold a napkin or walk from one side of a kitchen to the other. But standing in that corridor with that piece of paper folded inside her palm and the sound of voices behind a closed door that she was absolutely certain she should not still be standing outside of, 11 seconds felt like the rest of her life compressing itself into a single breath she could not bring herself to release. Mara had made herself a promise a long time ago. She had promised herself she would never again stand still when standing still meant someone got hurt. She had broken that promise once. It had cost her everything. She was not going to break it again. The door at the far end of the corridor opened. He came through it the way dangerous men always move in rooms they own. Not fast, not slow, just absolute. Like gravity. Like the kind of certainty that does not require permission. Seo walked toward her, and Mara had approximately 4 seconds to decide what kind of woman she was going to be tonight. She stepped into his path. She held out the folded napkin. He stopped. He looked at her face first, not at the napkin. That was the first thing she noticed about him. He did not look at the object. He looked at her, and whatever he saw there made him take it. He unfolded it with one hand. He read it. His expression did not change. That was the second thing she noticed. Most people, when they read something that should change everything, let it show on their face for at least a moment. A flicker, a tightening around the eyes, something. Seo read one sentence that should have turned the entire evening upside down, and his face gave her absolutely nothing. He folded the napkin. He slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket. He looked at her one more time. Just for a second. Then he walked past her and pushed open the door to the private dining room like a man who had no particular concerns about what was waiting for him on the other side. Across the table, Victor smiled at him like a man who had already won, and Seo smiled back. Mara stood in the corridor outside the closed door and pressed one hand flat against the wall to steady herself, because she could not tell from that smile whether Kai believed her. She could not tell whether she had just saved his life or whether she had just made the most dangerous mistake of her own. To understand what happened in that restaurant on a Thursday night in April, you have to understand what kind of man Seo is. Not the version of him that exists in whispered conversations and careful silences when his name comes up in certain rooms. The real version. The one underneath the suits and the stillness and the silver ring he never takes off his right hand. Seo built his empire on a single principle. Information is the only real currency. Money is just information made physical. Power is just information hoarded long enough. Every deal he had ever made, every alliance, every decision that kept him alive and ahead of everyone who wanted him gone, all of it came back to that one truth. You cannot hurt what you cannot understand. And nobody had ever fully understood Seo. Not his enemies, not his rivals, not the people who thought they were his friends, and certainly not Min. The restaurant was called Sora. 32nd floor of a glass tower in the financial district. Private dining available for parties who required discretion and could afford the kind of discretion that does not appear on any menu. It was exactly the kind of place a man like Kai chose for a meeting of this significance, not because he was comfortable there. Seo was not a man who sought comfort. He chose it because he had personally vetted every staff member, every exit, and every camera angle 3 days before tonight. He chose it because when you are about to sit across from a man whose proposal could expand your network into territory worth more than most national budgets, you choose the room you understand better than the other man does. Before we go any further, I have to ask you something. Where in the world are you watching this right now? Because this story is the kind that hits different depending on where you are when you hear it. Drop your city in the comments. I want to know who is staying up late for this one. Now, back to Kai. 6 years before tonight, Seo had a sister named Sue. She was 23 years old. She was the one person in his entire life who looked at everything he had become and loved him anyway. Not because she did not know what he was. She knew exactly what he was. She loved him because she remembered the boy he had been before the streets took the softness out of him, and she refused to let him forget that boy entirely. Kai brought her to a meeting for the first time that week. He wanted to show her one night of his world. Just one. He wanted her to see that he was not just what people said he was, that the empire had a legitimate face, a table, a handshake, a business card with a real address on it. The meeting was in a hotel lobby in a city that was not their own. An associate had assured him it was clean, safe, a formality. It was not clean. It was not safe. And nothing about it was a formality. Sue did not come home from that meeting. Kai spent 2 years trying to find who had ordered it. He found pieces, fragments, faces that led to other faces. He found enough to keep hunting, but never enough to end it. He wore her ring on his right hand every day, and he never said her name out loud because saying it made her absence a thing that existed in the air between him and another person, and he could not afford to let anyone see that wound. Not in his world. The silver ring was not jewelry, it was a timer. Min had been with him for 7 years. He was the best translator Kai had ever worked with, fluent in Korean, English, Mandarin, and Japanese. Quiet, efficient. He had the practiced invisibility of someone who understood that the most powerful position in a room is the one that nobody is watching. 7 years, every major meeting, every delicate negotiation, every conversation that required absolute precision. Kai had trusted him with things he had not trusted another living person with, and Min had taken every one of those things and catalogued them. Patiently, carefully. Like a man who is not in a hurry because he has already decided how the story ends. Mara had worked at Sora for 14 months. She had taken the job because it paid well, because the hours were manageable, and because the manager had not asked too many questions about the gap in her employment history that corresponded exactly to the 6 months after her brother died when she had not been able to make herself do much of anything at all. Her brother's name was Kofi. He was 26 years old. He had worked as a delivery driver in the district below this restaurant, and one evening he had been in the wrong place when 2 men had a conversation that was never meant to be overheard. He came to Mara that night pale and shaking, and she had held his face in her hands and told him to calm down, that he was probably misunderstanding what he heard, that people like that did not care about delivery drivers. She had told him to stay quiet. She had told him to stay safe. 3 days later, he was gone. The official account said accident. Mara knew it was not an accident. She knew it the way you know things that live in your body rather than your mind. The knowledge that sits in your sternum like a stone you cannot cough up and cannot swallow down. She had stayed quiet. She had told him to stay quiet. And it had cost him everything and cost her the version of herself she had been before that night. She had been on her way to the service corridor 2 nights before tonight's meeting when she heard voices from the linen storage room. The door was slightly open. She was not listening. She was simply there, in the wrong place, at the right time, the way her brother had once been, and she understood every word. What she heard was not about territory. It was not about money. It was about a man who had been told he was walking into a negotiation, but was actually walking into a trap that had been 7 years in the making, a trap that ended with his entire operation exposed to people who had the authority to make him disappear permanently. And the key to that trap was the man he trusted most to tell him the truth. The private dining room at Sora held 8 people comfortably and accommodated Kai's requirements precisely. Round table, single entrance, no adjacent rooms. 2 of Kai's people at the entrance, 2 of Victor's. Ray stationed outside with a clear sight line to both the room and the main corridor. It looked like a business dinner. It looked like 2 powerful men discussing an arrangement that would benefit them both. Victor opened with warmth. He complimented the restaurant. He made a comment about the wine selection. He talked about his recent travels in a way that communicated wealth and ease without trying to. He was extraordinary at this part, the part where nothing was happening yet and everything was already in motion. Min translated smoothly, every sentence crisp and clean. His voice was the same voice it had always been in these rooms, calm, precise, the voice of a man who processes language the way other men breathe, naturally and without effort. Kai listened. He responded. He asked 2 questions about the territory proposal that were designed to sound like due diligence and were actually something else entirely, and he watched Min's hands. This is the moment we need to talk about, because what was happening at that table and what the people at that table understood about what was happening were 2 entirely different things. Seo heard Min's translations. Victor heard Kai's responses. And between those 2 men, in the narrow corridor of language that only Min occupied, something was being quietly and precisely altered, not dramatically. That is the thing about exceptional betrayers. They do not change the meaning of a sentence all at once. They shift it by degrees. A word here, an emphasis there. A subtle reframing of intent that takes something firm and makes it sound flexible, takes something conditional and makes it sound like a commitment. Let me ask you something, and I genuinely want to know what you think. If you were Mara, standing outside that door knowing what you know, and the man inside is the head of a criminal empire, do you warn him or do you walk away? Because this is not a simple question. Leave your answer in the comments. Because what she chose and why she chose it is the whole heart of this story. Back to the table. Victor's team had submitted the proposed contract 3 weeks prior. Kai's legal team had reviewed it. Everything was clean. Standard revenue sharing, territorial boundaries, non-interference clauses, dispute resolution protocols. What Kai's legal team had reviewed was not the contract Min had brought to the table tonight. The document Min placed in front of Kai contained 4 additional clauses buried in language that required precise translation to fully understand. Clauses that constituted what a government attorney would recognize immediately as admission of specific operational activities. Clauses that, once signed, could be handed to a particular intelligence contact of Victor's within 48 hours. Kai would not be arrested. He would be neutralized. His network would be dismantled from the inside by people who had been waiting for exactly this kind of documentation for 11 years. Victor knew this. Min knew this. The only person at the table who should have known this and did not was Seo, except that Kai had not touched the contract yet. He had let Victor speak for 40 minutes. He had responded with exactly the right level of enthusiasm and the right level of caution to make Victor feel comfortable. He had asked a 3rd question, this one about the specific language in Clause 7, and watched Min's translation, and watched Victor's response, and felt something he had been feeling for 14 months slowly come into focus. Outside in the main corridor, Mara was doing her job. She cleared a table near the corridor entrance. She poured water for a couple at the table nearest the private room door. She moved through the room with the professional smoothness of someone who had long ago learned how to be invisible in a space without being absent from it. She was watching the door. She had watched Kai walk into that room, and she had not been able to determine from his face whether he had read her note as a warning or as an annoyance to be filed away and ignored. She told herself she had done what she could do. She had passed the information. What he did with it was his business. She had no obligation to a man like Seo. She had no connection to him. She had delivered the message. Her part was done. She told herself this 4 times in the next 20 minutes, and did not believe it once. Ray received the first piece of confirmed intelligence at 22 minutes past the hour. He had sent 2 people out 2 hours before the meeting began. One to verify Victor's registered business credentials. One to look at something else entirely. Something Kai had quietly asked him to look at 14 months ago and had never stopped looking at since. The first report came back clean. The second did not. Ray read the second report twice. Then he read it a 3rd time. Then he stood very still in that corridor for almost a full minute. He needed to get this to Kai, but Kai was in a closed meeting with a man whose people were standing at the door. The message Ray had received contained 3 pieces of information. The first was about Victor's intelligence contact and the nature of their working relationship. The second was about the contract currently sitting on the table in front of Kai and what it would legally constitute if signed. The third piece of information was about something that happened 6 years ago in a hotel lobby in a city that was not their own, and that third piece was the one that changed everything. Ray did not burst in. That would have caused exactly the kind of scene Kai would never permit. Instead, he did what Kai had trained him to do in precisely this situation. He requested a private moment with Kai through the room's intercom under the pretext of an urgent call requiring his attention. It was the agreed signal for information that could not wait. Kai excused himself with the ease of a man who apologizes for nothing and makes apologies feel like a courtesy. He stepped into the corridor. He looked at Ray's face and Seo, who had not shown a complete, unguarded emotion in 6 years, felt something move through him like cold water through stone. Victor had not come to negotiate. Victor had come to finish something he had started 6 years ago. The operation that took Sue had not been a territorial accident. It had been deliberate. Victor had needed Kai destabilized. He had needed Kai grief-stricken and furious and hunting shadows for 2 years, while Victor consolidated the territory Kai had been too shattered to hold. It had worked exactly as planned. And now, 6 years later, Victor had found a cleaner way to finish what he started. No violence, no exposure. Just a signature and a file and a man who trusted his translator. Min had known about Sue for 5 years, and he had not tried to warn Kai. He had not tried to protect him, because Victor had gotten to Min 3 years ago and made Min an offer that Min, who was already carrying his own long grievance against Kai, had found impossible to refuse. His own family's safety, his own exit from a life he had never chosen for himself. And the satisfaction of watching Seo face a reckoning that Min had spent years believing was overdue. Victor had not found a translator. He had found a man who was already willing. Kai stood in that corridor for 8 seconds. Then he put Sue back where she lived, in the place inside his chest where he kept the things that made him human, and he closed the door on her, and he walked back into the dining room and smiled at Victor. Here is what makes Seo extraordinary. Not his network, not his resources, not the people who are afraid of his name. What makes him extraordinary is what he is able to do with the space between knowing and acting. Most people, when they learn they are in danger, react. Their body gives them away. Their voice shifts a register. Their hands do something they did not authorize. The fear leaks through whatever container they have built for it because that is simply what human beings do. Seo sat back down at that table, knowing that the man across from him had orchestrated his sister's death, was engineering his destruction, and had corrupted the one person he had trusted most in 7 years. He sat back down and asked Victor a question about operational costs in the new territory, and genuinely sounded like a man who was curious about the answer. What was Kai actually doing? He was buying 12 minutes. He needed 12 minutes for the contingency he had already set in motion 14 months ago when he first noticed a hairline fracture in Min's behavior. A single meeting where the outcome had not matched the tone of the conversation. A small thing. The kind of thing only a man who had built his entire empire on the precision of information would notice. He had said nothing to Min. He had simply begun to prepare. Victor believed he had orchestrated a perfect trap. What Victor did not know was that a careful man, a genuinely careful man, does not wait to be trapped. He watches the trap being constructed, and when the time is right, he steps into it on purpose, because the only person who controls a trap completely is the person who built it. Min believed he had secured his own future. Both of them were about to find out what it feels like to be wrong in a room they cannot leave gracefully. Min pulled Kai aside during the natural break between the first and second courses. His voice was low. His glasses had a slight fog at the corners, which was the only tell, the only physical evidence that Min was not as composed as he appeared. He said the words he had probably been rehearsing for weeks. He said he had made a terrible mistake. He said Victor had approached him years ago and made threats he had not known how to answer. He said he had been afraid. He said he had never wanted this. He said he was sorry. And here is where I need to stop and say something directly to you, because right now, if you are anything like me, you are feeling something very specific about Min and his apology. Because this is the thing about people who betray you slowly, over years, with full knowledge of what they are doing. They always have a reason. They always have a story about why they had no choice. And those stories are always at least partially true, which is the worst part. Because partial truth in the mouth of someone who lied to you for 7 years is not redemption. It is just a more sophisticated lie. Drop a fire emoji in the comments right now if you are as done with Min as I am. Kai placed a hand on Min's shoulder. He let Min feel the relief of that gesture for exactly 3 seconds. Then he spoke, quietly, without emotion, in the measured, unhurried tone of a man who has already resolved everything that needs resolving and is simply informing another person of the outcome. He told Min that he had known about Victor's arrangement for 14 months. He told Min that his calls had been monitored for 11 months. He told Min that the contract currently sitting on the dining table had been reviewed by people who had already documented every alteration Min had made to the original language. He told Min that everything that had needed to happen tonight had already happened. He told Min that the only question remaining was a personal one, not a professional one, and that he was not ready to answer the personal question yet. Min did not speak. There was nothing to say. He had spent 7 years believing he was the one who understood how this story ended. He had been so certain of his own plan that he had never once seriously entertained the possibility that the man he was planning it against was already 5 chapters ahead. Before we watch what happens in the next 10 minutes, I need you to do something for me. I want you to decide right now what you think Kai is going to do when he walks back through that door. Does he expose Victor quietly and let him leave knowing it is already over? Does he let him sign a document that has already been replaced? Or is there a third option that neither Victor nor Min saw coming? Tell me your prediction in the comments right now, because what happens next surprised everyone who was there. Victor noticed it first. Not in Kai's face. Kai's face was still giving him nothing, which was, in retrospect, the tell he should have been reading all along. A man who is worried looks worried. A man who is managing you looks pleasant. What Victor noticed was Ray. Ray was no longer at his position outside the room. Victor had men at the restaurant entrance. He had established their positions 30 minutes before Kai arrived, which was standard for a man of his caution. They were there as insurance, not because he expected things to go wrong tonight, because things going wrong was always a possibility you prepared for. He sent a signal, a glance at the man on his left, a slight movement of his chin toward the door. The man rose from the table. Kai watched this happen. He watched Victor's composure shift from confidence to calculation. He watched the signal. He watched the man stand. And he did what he always did when a situation reached this particular juncture. He removed all urgency from his body and he picked up his wine glass. He said quietly enough that Min would need to translate that he had one question before they proceeded to signatures. Victor, who was now waiting for information about where Ray was and why his man at the door had not returned, told Kai to ask his question. Kai asked Victor what year his father had registered his first import business. Victor went very still. It was a question that had no business being at this table. It was a question that belonged to a conversation about the past, not to a negotiation about territory and revenue and future cooperation. But it was not really a question. It was a statement. It was Seo saying across a candlelit table with a glass of wine in his hand, "I know who you are. I know what you did. I know what your connection to my translator is. I know what you intended for tonight, and I am the only person at this table who came in here knowing all of it." Victor said nothing for 4 full seconds. Then he said very quietly that perhaps they should speak privately. Kai smiled. He said they already were. Ray came through the door. Victor's man at the entrance had not returned because Victor's man at the entrance had been redirected, politely, by people who worked for Kai and had been in position since 2 hours before the meeting began. Victor's second man at the table looked at Ray and at the 2 people behind Ray and performed his own rapid calculation about the current balance of the room. He sat back down. There is a particular kind of silence that falls over a room when a man who believed he was in control realizes simultaneously that he was never in control and that the person who was in control let him believe otherwise for a specific reason. Victor sat inside that silence, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he did not have a move. Kai set down his wine glass. He slid a document across the table toward Victor. He told Victor that he would be signing it tonight, not the contract Min had brought, the corrected version that Kai's people had prepared, the one that transferred a specific portion of Victor's existing holdings as agreed compensation for the damage caused to Kai's operations over the past 6 years, including damage done to things that could not be replaced or compensated, but for which there would nevertheless be an accounting. Victor looked at the document. He looked at Kai. He looked at Ray. He picked up the pen. If you have been here from the beginning of this story and you felt what just happened at that table, I need you to do one thing before we find out what happens between Kai and Mara. Subscribe, because this channel is where stories like this live every single week. Right here, hit the button and come home. Now. Min was taken from the room quietly. He did not resist. He did not speak. He walked out through the door with the posture of a man who had been carrying an enormous weight for an enormous amount of time and had just set it down, even if what was waiting on the other side of the corridor was its own kind of reckoning. Kai did not watch him go. He was already thinking about the corridor outside. The restaurant was emptying. The kitchen had gone quiet. The last table of regular diners had settled their bill and gathered their coats. The overhead lights had dimmed the way they always did in the final half hour before closing, giving the space a softer and more honest quality than it had at the height of the evening. Mara was finishing the last of her tables when she heard footsteps behind her. She knew without turning around. She set down the last of the glasses and turned. They looked at each other across 4 feet of empty restaurant floor, and the weight of an entire evening settled between them like weather. He asked her how she knew. She told him about the storage room. She told him about 2 nights ago, and the slightly open door, and the conversation she had not meant to overhear. She told him about the language, about the years she had spent learning it because her brother had loved it, and she had wanted to share it with him, and after he was gone she had not been able to stop, because stopping felt like losing him twice. If someone you love would understand exactly why Mara did what she did tonight, share this with them right now, because this story is for every person who has ever had to decide between the safe choice and the right one. Share it. You already know who needs to hear it. Kai listened to everything she said without moving. Then he was quiet for a moment. Then he said her brother's name. She did not move. She had not told him her brother's name. She had not mentioned him by anything except a pronoun. She had not told Kai Seo anything about who Kofi was, or where he had worked, or what had happened to him. And yet he knew his name. And in the silence that followed, Mara understood that the connection between her life and Kai Seo's was not something that had begun tonight in a corridor with a folded napkin. It had begun 2 years ago, with a delivery driver who had been in the wrong place, who had come home scared, who she had told to stay quiet. Kai looked at her for a long moment in the rain-lit quiet of the emptying restaurant, and then he asked her one question. He asked her if she had known when she slipped him the warning tonight that he and her brother's story were connected. She did not answer. She looked at him with everything she knew in her eyes and nothing she was willing to say yet on her lips. The rain came harder against the glass. The lights above the empty tables hummed softly, and the question stayed where she left it, in the air between them, unanswered, unresolved, the beginning of something neither of them had the language for yet, and that is where we leave them tonight. Kai Seo, a man who dismantled a 7-year trap and still walked out of the room carrying the one wound that never heals. Mara, a woman who finally chose the right thing at the right moment and in doing so cracked open a door she is not sure she is ready to walk through. The translator is gone. The deal is done. Victor is finished. But the question Kai asked in a quiet restaurant while the rain came down, that question has an answer, and the answer changes everything. Part 2 is coming, and if you are not subscribed yet, you are going to miss the moment when Mara finally tells him the truth. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and bring someone with you, because this story is only getting started.